would request everybody to stay tuned for the next session, which is on the theme mental health and wellness. Now we will be playing a short clip before the session, so I would request you all to please focus on the screen. While a one-size-fit may seem very appealing, but when it comes to mental health solutions, they are complex and vary from person to person, requiring personalized approach that takes into account with the unique needs of a person with different circumstances and individuality. Our next session will be talking about more in depth regarding this topic. The session theme is mental health and wellness, and the session topic is can't we create a mental health solution with one size fit all approach? Now, I would request the panel to please come on stage. I would request Dr. Sravani Reddy, doctorpreneur and healthcare strategist, Dr. Tarun Sehgal, psychiatrist and co-founder of Solh Wellness, Dr. Mimansa Singh Tanwar, clinical psychologist at Fortis Healthcare, in conversation with Mr. Kapil Gupta, mental health activist and co-founder of the Solh Wellness app. And first of all, I would thank each one of you who are present here, our entire panel. Thank you for taking your time out and coming here. It means a lot for all of us. And we'll be beginning the session in a short while. Please stay tuned.
Good morning, everyone. This is a very important session. While we keep talking about literature, and that's, of course, what Pragati Vichar Festival is all about. In my view, literature in a lot of ways is about providing peace and about providing happiness. Yeah, a lot of literature is about providing knowledge and wisdom and ability for people to grow and prosper and all of that. But really, a lot of the literature, a lot of the literaties, a lot of the reading is for the purposes of providing happiness and for the purposes of providing peace. In this complex world, we all keep struggling with mental health, and really, we all keep struggling with what mental health essentially means. For that purpose, today, we put together an expert panel, and I'm extremely glad to be here being the moderator of this session. We have three mental health professionals, people who have spent years and decades working within the mental health arena, and I'm the only non-doctor in this panel, so I'm extremely glad to be here. Uh, First of all, we have Dr. Mimansa Singh Tanwar, who has an MPhil degree in clinical psychology. She is a cognitive behavioral therapist with a keen interest in adolescent mental health. She takes parent and teacher training workshops on addressing adolescent-related issues. She also conducts academic workshops for students of psychology and mental health practitioners. And of course, as our MC mentioned earlier, she works with Fortis Healthcare. Thank you so much for coming, Dr. Tanwar. We also have with us Dr. Sravani Reddy, who is a global healthcare leader, Indian entrepreneur, and humanitarian with an untiring zeal to innovate practices for better results. She is a seasoned healthcare professional with valuable experience in spearheading operations for complex clinical practices along with healthcare systems management. She is a constant learner of various aspects of integrative medicine, mental health, fitness, community service, and healthcare counseling, owning to the needs of recurring societal requirements with a mission of being a solution provider. Thank you so much, Dr. Reddy, for being here. We also have with us Dr. Tarun Sehgal, who is a divisional director and senior consultant psychiatrist in Australia. Dr. Sehgal has worked in mental health for more than 2 decades. A decade within the UK public health system, and then a decade in the Australian public health system. He has a special interest in service development and mental health related medical legal work as well. Dr. Sehgal has joined the team in this quest to create a better, healthy and supportive system for everyone's mental health needs. Thank you so much, Dr. Sehgal, for being here. What I want to start with, and Dr. Tanwar, let's start with you. What do you think are the pivotal steps to create a culture of creating development around or developing awareness on mental health and well-being so that it can help in eliminating stigmas and taboos? We see that as one of the most complex challenges as we talk about mental health. So what do you think can be done? What are the pivotal steps?
See, when we talk about any topic which has been tabooed for a very long time, I think it needs to start with one, acceptance. It needs to be run on awareness, and it needs to be driven by action. That's our one-size-fits-all for anything which has a lot of misnomer attached to it for decades. And when we talk about mental illness, there has been a lot of myth and stigma which has continuously left people be in silence and struggle in silence, not being able to open up when it comes to mental illnesses. So if you look at different categories, I mean, mental illness does not discriminate. It does not discriminate anyone. It can happen to anyone. You, me, a child, a young adult, a professional, a global leader, anyone for that matter, a celebrity. It does not discriminate, but we do. As people, we do because we have a certain perception when it comes to mental illnesses still. So even yesterday, when somebody from an urban city called me and say that I am open to getting my mother, but my mother is still feeling that you're taking me to a doctor who's referred to as a doctor of somebody that you don't want to go to, because again, the connotations that are used are pagal ka doctor. I am not crazy. And these words, the language needs to change. And this is where it starts. When you have awareness, you change the language because language matters. So whether it's schools, whether it is organizations, whether it is workplace, whether it is literature, whether it is creative field, everywhere we need to recognize our individual role that we can play to be able to break the stigma and build awareness.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Reddy, let me actually continue this particular conversation around stigmas and taboos further. In your role as an entrepreneur, specifically as an entrepreneur and working as a humanitarian in this mental health arena, what would be your take on this? What are the kinds of things that we as a society can look at to break through this concept, this stigmas and taboos that are surrounding mental health?
Thank you so much for having me today, Kapil, to begin with, and hello to everybody and good morning. Dr. Tanwar already initiated the answer in the right direction, saying that how do we approach it. I'd like to take a different take on this. As a community and society, the moment we use these words, we look outside, right? A community is looked outside, a society is looked outside, right? But to my belief that everything begins right from childhood, from the homes that we come from. So if we want to change anything, change is a very big word, but if you want to change or make a difference, I think the way to look is inside. First, to begin with one as oneself as an identity. Second is to look at our own homes, right? As a mother of a 7-year-old child, this is how I think. If I want to help her battle her struggles better, it needs to begin right from home, how I raise her, how I accept and acknowledge, like she rightly said, how I am aware of who I am and the challenges that I face mentally and how I address them, because children grow by seeing how we behave around them. And for me, as somebody who was a child once, like all of you were also, it all begins from childhood. It begins from the homes, whichever homes they are, small, big, great, I'm not talking about that. But the change has to begin from homes, right? Do we speak about these issues? Do we address these issues? At least she spoke about a mother who wasn't comfortable. But today, if a child has a complaint, are we even able to acknowledge that complaint? When I have issues, am I open to talking about it, right? And in our societies especially, I'm somebody who's grown up in this country and very proud of it. I have always been shunned every single time something related to mental health is brought up. And this is a typical Indian middle class family that I'm talking about. Or you don't talk about these things. Or this is all right, have something, eat something, go watch a movie. That's what I was told. We were told. I think that needs to change. The only way I can make that change happen today is to be different as a mother that I can be as a parent. Second is as a physician, when I deal with my patients, how differently can I create this awareness amongst them to begin it at their homes. Third, you asked about being an entrepreneur and a humanitarian. Like she rightly said, there are no biases. It doesn't discriminate at all. How I conduct myself while I conduct myself as an employer, as a leader, as whoever I walk out into the community. The more I am open about speaking and acknowledging about these is where the change will begin. And it'll begin from us. And it'll begin from me and you and each one of us. I think that's how we should look at it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I actually do want to share a couple of anecdotes in this as well. Firstly, let me say mental health for me is something that I have been exploring quite diligently over the last couple of years. So I'm still a novice, a starter in that. But one of the things that I have seen while I have been going through and having conversations and looking at a lot of arenas within this is it seems like we now have gotten to a space where we are kind of comfortable with acknowledging mental health issues of everybody except ourselves. So we are now comfortable with having people around us who have mental health issues. We understand what depression is, we understand what anxiety is, we understand what panic attacks are. We don't call them as tantrums anymore. That's, I think, something that we have, we are achieving slowly, but successfully. But where I still see a problem is in two areas. One, acknowledging mental health issues for ourselves. Yes. And number two, and probably bigger than that, acknowledging mental health issues for our children. We are fine with mental health issues of our spouses. Well, we all think our spouses have mental health issues. That's a different topic of discussion. We are fine with acknowledging mental health issues for our parents. They are old. But we still have a lot of challenge looking through and acknowledging mental health issues for our kids. With that, Dr. Tarun, I specifically want to ask you about, do you think mental health or mental illnesses are cyclic in nature? And how does one determine it?
So first of all, good morning to all of you, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here today. And even though I have been working as in mental health for last more than 2 decades, I still don't consider myself as an expert. And the reason is I get amazed every day when I see my patients, and every day there's some learning and something new for me to get to know about the life experiences people go through. And to answer to your very specific question, Kapil, what you have asked, are the mental health conditions are cyclical in nature or not? So first of all, to have an understanding, mental illnesses they present in a range of different kind of presentation. It can range from disorders which are neurotic, like depression, anxiety, and obsessive compulsive disorder, what we normally know through, or panic disorders, and it can range to the more severe form, what we know as psychotic disorders, or to the extreme of the mood swings for people like bipolar, and these are much more difficult. So it's very difficult to say which one and how one will go through, what kind of course one will follow, and it's very individual. The important part is to know about our own self, and this is what I try to educate all of my patients when I see them for the first time, that the more you know about your illness, the more you know about your own self, the better you will be able to manage another episode. Some of the conditions are more like personality disorders and things like that. They have their own course, and people develop those as part of their life experiences and the kind of personality they get to develop. So it's very hard to know how one will develop into any kind of, when they start with the illness. The important bit is having the awareness and knowledge about your own self, about the condition you're going through, and that's where the journey starts, and that is the breaking point for the stigma as well. And going back to the previous question, which is very, very important aspect, even though in my practice I do have time to time people coming and asking, are you telling me, am I mad? And again, this is not something very easy to answer when someone is going through that level of emotions. But for that particular individual, that's what it all matters, to have an answer in yes and no. But life and mental health disorders, they're so complex, the answers are sometimes not that easy to just be an answer in that form of yes and no. What I try to do is try to educate people to understand about their own self and develop a level of reflective practices. And this is one thing we have been trying to do through the Solh app, as having this option of the mood diary and the ability to record their own reflective notes on daily basis, that how they feel about their mental health and about their own emotions on regular basis. So on one hand, yes, mental health disorders can be cyclical in nature, but not necessarily for all and each of the presentation. This is how the course will get to follow. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So let's come back to you, Dr. Tanwar. How does one identify their triggers, and what can people do to manage them?
I think one of the key things that we need to recognize when it comes to mental health illnesses and mental health problems is that it's because it's about the way we think, it impacts that. The way we feel, it impacts that. Your mental illness also impacts your behavior. A lot many times, and even now, we tend to feel that if I just do some corrective measures to how I'm thinking, and just merely positive thinking, and just merely practicing positive things will help me come out of my mental illness. It's something that we believe that we can snap out of because it's something that I am creating. Because just I'm thinking negative, so if you go to someone and you say them, then this is what I'm thinking, and they'll say, oh, you think positive things, do some chanting, do some yoga, do all of these things. I mean, they're add-ons. These things will help you to create a preventive aspect when it comes to your day-to-day life, your well-being, and all of those aspects. Absolutely. But when it comes to mental illnesses, we need to certainly recognize the biological part, which certainly plays a role over here. It's like any other physical illness. It's like if you are going through a thyroid problem or a diabetes problem, you go to a doctor because you recognize there is some hormonal chemical imbalance which is happening. Similarly, in mental illnesses, it is about the biology. It's about, yes, the psychological aspects, which is our basic temperament and how our own attitudes. And along with that, the environment, the social plays such a huge role. But until unless we don't recognize the importance of the biological part, which means it's an illness, there are some neurochemical imbalances which are making me think negative, which are impacting my mood. I feel sad persistently for 2 weeks. I've been anxious, and the anxiety is making me seek reassurance, call somebody 20 times, and which as a family member, somebody would say, why are you doing this? There is so much expressed emotion from the family that comes in. Again, all of this comes down to the fact that we don't have much awareness. We don't have yet a way of how we can sort of bring together patients and families to sort of work around to deal with the challenges that they also face in an interpersonal aspect. So what's important is to recognize the three major aspects of mental illnesses, which again can happen to anyone: the biological part, the psychological part, and the environmental part. And when we talk about the environment, we are talking about us.
Absolutely.
And so over there, when we look at awareness, we talk about mental health curriculum in schools. When we talk about workplace mental health, again, we talk about the EBITDAs and the PINLs. Why not about the mental health outcomes over there? When we talk about any organization for that matter, we talk about well-being programs. But again, how are we able to really place it into the structure, and how it percolates down deeper is something that we need to look at.
Absolutely. Let me add one more element to it. I was just talking to, a few days back, I was talking to an entrepreneur who is working on a couple of different aspects of mental health in the Americas as well as in Latin America. So in North America as well as in Latin America. And I was talking to them about what we are doing from a soul wellness perspective, how the entire platform is structured. And one of the things he added was, he said, you got it all wrong. It's not just about emotional, it's not just about physical or chemical. You gotta, first of all, look at the health of the gut. And I was scratching my head saying, probably that old saying of a man's happiness goes through their stomach is probably right. Anyway, with that, let me move to the next question. So, Dr. Reddy, many of us don't really know how to deal with our day-to-day stress. And we often are not even comfortable to expressing it to people around them. In such a scenario, how do people kind of seek mental health support for themselves?
Okay, firstly, I think it'll begin with acknowledgement again. I'm coming back to that word again, and we've done that before in our conversations also. Everything will begin from acknowledgement. Stress is so commonly used today for everything. It's thrown around for everything, right? Probably you have stress. Maybe I'm stressed. You are stressed, It's the easiest word to use, right? And to tell somebody, or if somebody comes up to you and says, I'm stressed, to tell them to de-stress is one word, right? But then how does that happen? So first is acknowledgement. When you say stress, it's not just being, overworked or, being busy. I don't think you should translate that to stress. It has to be defined very, very subjectively. What stress could mean for me may not be stress for him or you. So what is important is personal acknowledgement and understanding of what my stress is, to understand it, number one. Second is to know how it's being created, right? The triggers, what is creating that? For example, towards the end of the day, or towards the end of the month, or towards the end of the week, or a certain period of the month, you feel a certain way, physically, emotionally, psychologically. There's a high that you feel or a low that you feel, right? To understand the pattern of what has triggered or what is the journey that has led to you. For example, some people could be stressed to be in the presence of the public like this, to sit on a podium and speak, right? And this could be the cause of their stress. To understand that and that trigger, and what do? You asked a very simple question. How do they seek support, right? I think the support can begin from their own selves before they reach out to anybody else. If I know that something triggers and puts me in a situation, the least human behavior, right? What would you do? Would you run towards it or away from it? You would run away from it. But the biggest challenge is this, right? All of us are in circumstances in life, both personally, professionally, from our families and otherwise. We are stuck in situations where it's not always possible to run away from it, right? That's why we use the word, I'm stuck. So I end up getting stressed. But now that you've identified what is the cause of the stress, first is to identify how can you make amends to it, right? One, can I walk away from it? That's a conscious choice. We are beings of choice, right? She spoke about people, or people calling somebody because of anxiety 20 times. It's a choice I'm making every single time I'm picking up that mobile phone, right? But if that's causing my stress, then do I walk away from it? Do I walk away from being here today if this is stressing me out? The work has to begin from oneself. And this I speak a lot about stress. One, because, PTSD is something I've battled and I'm currently battling also personally. Stress is very, very personal to me. Emotional stress, right? Grief is very personal to me. Now, do I go out and seek help? Sure. But the first help needs to come from within. I have to identify what's stressing me. I have to identify where I need help. Then structure it, right? For a particular help, I go to him. Or a particular piece of help, I go to her. But this piece has to be dealt by me. that awareness of oneself is extremely important. It's easy to say you're stressed, go seek help. I don't think it works like that. The solution has to begin from oneself. And then, of course, you have solutions out there. People like you, people like, clinicians or otherwise, you can seek help. But you will not be able to do that unless you acknowledge and realize and start your journey. I think that's where it begins, within oneself.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Reddy. Dr. Tarun, I have a specific question for you. You know, a lot of us, we have this perception around mental health. Let me take depression for an example. People have this perception that, when somebody will have depression, they would be either like, that mom in Bollywood movies who just sits on one corner, looks at the wall and doesn't speak at all, or would be like that side actor in the Bollywood movie who tears his clothes apart and just runs. That's not really how depression happens, right? Either for other people or for yourself. Can you talk about the ways in which somebody, for themselves as well as for other, internalizes, identifies, and then kind of looks through how to provide a support structure for a person?
So first of all, depression, as you're referring to. So again, like many of the mental disorders, their range of presentations what one can go through. And most of the diagnostic criteria, if you see, they divide in some form of mild, moderate, severe. And that is what it describes, that there is a range of symptoms. And even though one can have the similar kind of symptoms, but then it can be more intense when you talk about the severity of the particular illness. So depression in particular, it's more around when you feel sort of not having interest in the things one get otherwise used to have interest in things, and having that sort of feeling of low mood and unhappiness. For some, there could be a very clear reason. For others, they could not even identify a reason, and it just happened as very much biological for them, or what we call chemical imbalance. What we know for any of the mental disorder, it's a very much holistic approach in terms of finding the triggers, in terms of finding the approaches, and what we have discussed already, it's on the basis of one is the biological aspect, or what we talk about the chemical imbalance. The other part is the psychological part of it, what we try through the specific therapies as part of the treatment options. And the other is the environmental factors and how we can sort of bring certain change to our lifestyle, the way we practice. And all of these things collectively embarks on how the journey goes for an individual. There are genetic bases, there are a lot of different things around mental health and mental disorders. But one key element that a lot of these things have certain level of emotions which are normal in nature. We all are allowed to feel unhappy about things. We all are allowed to feel anxious in certain situations. We can sort of feel panicky in certain situations. You can have sort of a feeling of palpitation, or you might notice that that you get sort of anxious as compared to your other situation. Maybe at home you feel more comfortable. In some of the setting you find yourself in much more different in terms of emotion. So emotion is a normal part of human behavior. The time you describe it as a disorder, when it starts impacting on someone's level of functioning, on your routine ways you would otherwise would like to do things, but started to impact on those things. And that's where the concept, or that's where the definition of disorder comes in. So on one hand, it's important to understand that these are sort of emotions which are normal to human behavior. On the other hand, that is it really a disorder for me or not? And if so, what level of severity? And that is defined by the intensity of the symptoms and the impact of those on anyone's level of functioning. And that's where then the part of the treatment comes in, that how you control and manage. And that's where the structured sort of concept of the treatment, the more you're aware of your own self, you will be able to identify what level of approach one needs to have. And seeking support from expert is not something which should be avoided or delayed. This is something one has to look into early on, because most of the mental illnesses, the earlier you treat, the more preventive work you do, you can shape the change of the future outcomes in a much better way, or in much more positive part of it. And this is something we have been trying to approach through our Solh app as well, that we are trying to bring in the concept of awareness and preventive work, so that people get to develop much more healthy and well-being mental health for themselves, and we can help in creating a much better, healthy society in terms of the mental health well-being, so that we are not getting to the worsening end or the other side of the spectrum for mental disorders. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Sehgal. Dr. Tanwar, let me ask you a question specifically as it relates to India. And where I'm coming from is, there is an aspect of mental health or mental illnesses or mental health disorders where somebody goes through and has a problem and is going through and getting support for themselves. While we do that, and while we as a country, based on the limited amount of resources, based on the limited amount of capabilities that we are able to build, while we struggle to fulfill that, there is this entire, segment of people who may not be suffering from depression, who may not have anxiety, but they have mental health issues. I mean, at some level, me and everybody in this room would fall in that criteria. In this kind of a situation, what do you think as a society, as mental health practitioners and professionals, what do you think we can do to better provide support?
So in my earlier two conversations, I was referring a lot to the social part.
Yep.
And that was precisely the reason, because if you look at the dearth of experts that we have in India, we have only 0.75 psychiatrists per 100, million people, 1 million people. And if we look at depression globally, there are more than 300 million people across the globe who are suffering from depression, depression being the most common form of mental illnesses. There are more than 500% shortage of mental health experts in our country. So if everybody comes to me, Dr. Tarun, or Dr. Reddy, we'll burn out. That's not possible,
Sure.
right? So it's not possible and it's not needed that everybody needs to go and seek out for treatment. What we need to recognize is, one, of course, what Dr. Reddy had said, that stress is something that we need to address. The moment you recognize there is something which is stressing you, we have a tendency to brush it aside and say, we'll deal with it later, because there is something else that requires your attention. Now, the fact is, there is a stress which is unaddressed, this is going to pile up, and this is going to come out in some way or the other. So that's stress for you, our day-to-day life. When it comes to mental health problems, and I'm not talking about mental illnesses, I'm talking about mental health problem, which can happen to any one of us. Why? Because there could be a family member who's having a long-term physical illness. There could be grief that you may be going through. There could be a long-term difficult situation in your workspace. There could be a difficult marriage that you may be in. In all of those things, you don't need to immediately rush to a mental health professional. What you do need to do, and which is something that we are stepping away from as a society, is actually to talk to each other. As families, as colleagues, as friends, what are we doing over here to be able to support each other? So where is our empathy? Where is our ability to listen? I mean, so many times it happens in my own therapeutic setting. All I'm doing is just merely listening. My session is just merely listening to that patient who requires that empathetic, non-judgmental space without an advice, without a suggestion, and that's your psychological first aid. Yep. The chances are that you, me, would have more of an emotional difficulty or a distress than a physical distress. So we have these CPR trainings. What about psychological first aid trainings for all of us? How do we really sit and listen without jumping into an advice? A student, a child coming to me, my child coming to me and talking about, I have exam stress, and I have a friend I had a bad fight with. My immediate response as a parent is to rescue. Oh no, do this, do that, don't do this. No, that's not listening. Similarly, you have a friend who comes to you and says, I had this difficult time with the boss and this is something that happened. Your immediate need would be to give a solution and jump to an advice. That's not listening. Sure. So your advice may not be suitable. Your suggestion may not be workable. But the solution to the problem could also be just merely listening by being non-judgmental, stepping away from giving your belief system over there, and just helping somebody in your compassionate care space. And that is what our role is as a society. That's what we need to recognize, our psychological first aid. And just to add to one more thing, when you spoke about media, I think media has a responsible role to play when it comes to mental illnesses, because for a very long time, a lot of this shrouding of stigma would happen because of the kind of representation would happen of a person with mental illness. So when we talk about danger and a mentally ill person, when we talk about violence and a person struggling with mental illness, it's also because of the kind of perception that has been created over a period of time. And yet, even today, even though media is playing a good, positive role, but still we look at in the entertainment industry how there are very different representations and misrepresentations of mental illnesses. So we need to move away comedy, we need to move away from humor, we need to move away all of this when it comes to mental illness. We need to see this as a reality of our life, a problem we need to address. And we need to start with where I started, is acceptance, awareness, and action.
Thank you so much for that, and I completely agree with that. In fact, I would distinguish between media and Bollywood for a minute in this particular response. Media, a lot of times, does play a positive role, specifically when you are talking about mental health. But Bollywood, there are three evils around us that I purely blame Bollywood for. One evil for me is mental health. The second evil for me is this, the challenges that we face with the positioning of, or with how we look at women, specifically modern women in the country. And the third is gender identity issues. I think for specifically these three issues, there is a fourth one which is reservation, but I wouldn't talk about it here. But these three issues, I definitely would blame Bollywood for, at least blame them for not playing an active role in improving awareness and everything around that. With that, Dr. Reddy, let me ask you, we asked Dr. Tanwar about day-to-day stresses and how people look at it and everything. You have openly many times talked about your mental health challenges. So I guess for everybody around, we would like to know more about what practices do you follow to keep your mental health in check?
Okay. Yes, I've been very, very open about the challenges because I think that's my journey. And this is my therapy to talk about it. This is how I deal with it. To answer your question specifically, how do I cope? So let me just put it in 2-3 words, what I struggle with, so maybe I'll be able to make sense when I position certain solutions for it. I've always struggled with depression growing up, but that doesn't take away the extreme confident side of me. So the world would never know. Just like the example you gave about depression, I'm not one of those to look into the corners, but I've battled depression growing up all through my life, but it took me 22 years to put a name to it. And it happened so luckily for me because I was part of a medical school, not because I was created awareness or acknowledgement by somebody or a community, but it happened so through my own learning and journey. So one is, how do I deal with it, is one is depression. First, again, I go back to the word. The day I have acknowledged it is where my healing began. And it didn't begin in any support group or a therapy session. I had no clue they existed too. It happened because here is a girl who remembers her earliest memory of being a 6-year-old and battling certain things in the middle of the night, to now being a 22-year-old trying to put some words and sentences to what she was experiencing. That was my journey. Acknowledgement is where it began. Now, once it happened, second is, another challenge is now the current 2 things I've mentioned is, I've lost my father. I'm an only child. My best friend in my life has been my father. He passed away 2020 February with pancreatic cancer. After a diagnosis, we had 11 months with him, and I lost him. And we run a pharmaceutical business. I built it alongside with him. And like I said, he was my pal, right? And I had 11 months to watch him die, not once, every single day. I was his primary caregiver. So there's that grief, right, which began. Here we are talking about somebody who's battling an issue, but also has a child, as a mother, as a woman, as an entrepreneur. I'm also all of that in the society, but I come back home being a primary caregiver for a terminally ill patient who's a father again, right? That was 2020 February. I lost him. Then 2021 February, just a year later, I lost my husband to an accident. This was the second incident with a consecutive 12 months where I haven't even recovered from the previous episode or the stress. Again, that doesn't take away any of my roles and responsibilities, right? I am all that. You read my profile. I am all that to the world, right? And there's a business to manage, there's a family to manage, because now I have got a distressed, depressed mother, and a 6-year-old, 5.5-year-old child looking up to me, not knowing where we are headed. Now, here is depression, then there is severe grief, and then there is traumatic stress, right? Because all this period that I've been through, going through this, like she rightly said, everything piles up, and your body has a cellular memory. Everything that impacts you physically impacts you mentally. Everything that impacts you mentally affects you physically at a cellular level also. That cellular memory, which is what is stress, right? The traumatic stress builds up. Now here's where I was. Now to answer your question, what did I do? How did I deal with it? That I'm able to put myself here. Was it easy? No. What did I do? I said, this is my battle and I'll have to fight it. Acknowledgement. I am here. 34 years old of my, 35, 4, 5 years, whatever, 2 years ago of my life. I'm an individual. I have an identity. I have my life to lead. That's acknowledgement and saying no to whatever that is. But saying yes to the challenges. Do I feel weak? Yes. Then what do I do? I'm not somebody who's ever been helped with therapy, so sorry to say, because each person's context is different and the way they're wired is different. I'm not someone who can be helped by somebody who can talk to me. I've always been my help. So what did I do? I found my strength in my own self. What helped? There are things which people suggest and we all take very easily. For the longest of time, being a doctor myself, I never believed in meditation or anything to do with breathing or exercises. Fitness, yes, but anything to do with mental calming episodes, I never put my faith into it. But 2 years ago, when I found myself in that situation, when my body also broke down, I realized I needed to find help, and things which helped me were to focus on my inner self. One of the biggest helps was getting back to meditation and finding some form of exercise, right? To get back into a routine. Exercise helps, it helped me. Meditation helps, it helped me. I'm not saying it'll help everybody. You asked how did I cope with it, right? Number one. Second, I walked away from every trigger that would push me to that stressful zone. I don't have a picture of my father or my husband hanging in my house. People are surprised, but that's my trigger. I can't look at that picture every morning and be sad the whole day. You know, Kavya was talking about, she fumbled a little bit and she said, oh, sorry, bad day. It was just a silly bad moment. We use day and then we say life. No, you can walk away from it. It doesn't take away the love I feel for them or the respect I feel for them. It's my trigger. There's no picture hanging. So you walk, you make active choices. Second, you make what are the things that can push you towards healing. She spoke about being social. And I'm very, very social as a person, right? But I'm not someone who has a big group of friends. But all I need is that 1 or 2 people that I can confide in. I kept going back and talking. I did not feel weak or any less of a leader or a woman or a person to acknowledge these things. It doesn't take away anything from it. So you acknowledge, I did. You find your ways to get out. Third, I have a child I told you I raise. And she is my therapy too. So I have made an active choice of cutting down my professional work time and spending more time with her through travel, through games, gardening. I've cut down my work, my business, 50% last 2 years. I've just got back into the hustle recently in the 6 months. That's where I came and spoke to you guys. These are active choices. So make those choices, right? And one solution will not work for everybody because this is very, very personal and subjective. But when you know what is your trigger, walk away from it. When you know what can help, leave your ego aside, leave your personality of this aside, and go talk to that friend. Pick up that phone and call. A lot of times, people don't talk to their parents or their spouses thinking that, oh, I can't acknowledge this. I am the man of the house. How do I tell them that I'm feeling like this? Please, I wrote a blog on Men's Day saying, dear men, please open up. It doesn't make any of us any less of anything that we are. But the more we do not speak and acknowledge, that's how long the healing will take. And that's where we will break at some point. So one, asking for help is not weakness. Acknowledging is not accepting any failure. There is no good or bad or right or wrong about this. As Carl Jung writes, we are all human and everything related to us has got to do with emotions and how we feel. And it only makes us human, and I'm happy acknowledging this on this platform anywhere. And a part of my therapy, what helped Kapil, is to actively move towards participating in platforms and forums like these, associating with institutions that work in mental wellness, because that's my therapy. This is my therapy right now as I share this story with you. So find your own ways, what works for you. This worked for me. Looking into my own self and finding my strength, something else might work for you. But you need to identify that, because trust me, nobody's coming to help. And we are enough as our help.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Reddy. And, I do want to share, as I have been over the last couple of years, as I have been looking through and evaluating and kind of thinking about the opportunities and what more can we do from a mental health perspective, this is something that I have discovered as well. Every individual, every one of us is wired differently. Every one of us has different stimulations, different requirements, different ways in which we deal with stress, different ways in which we deal with happiness, different ways in which we deal with loneliness, and how we even define loneliness. Some of us may be lonely while being in a room full of 100 people, and some of us may not even be lonely while we are sitting just by themselves. Some of us, like you rightly said, you can't pour your heart out to somebody else. You can internalize it, you can go through it yourself, you can create a structure, a system, and support for yourself. But then there are definitely people who would require that ability to be able to just pour their heart out. In fact, this one aspect, that everybody requires a customized way for them to deal with their mental health, is what prompted us, Dr. Tarun and myself and Pranav, is what prompted us to begin and launch this concept of soul wellness, where we said we will create and empower people with a series of tools and solutions. A tool in the form of journaling, a tool in the form of support group, a tool in the form of goal setting, a tool in the form of find a doctor or a professional or a mental health professional who can provide support, a tool in the form of allied therapy. Allied therapy could be your stimulation. It could be yoga, it could be meditation, it could be dance, it could be music, it could be art, it could be sounds, it could be vibrations, or it could be anything else that you enjoy. It could be spending time with your kids. It could be just going out and gardening. It could be anything. And when I say food, I'm not even here talking about gut health that I mentioned earlier. That's, of course, another area. And then tools in the form of just having a mood meter. And, for us, it was very interesting. When we launched the mood meter or conceptualized it, our thought process was people are going to use it to record their particular mood. And I kept using this example. Maybe you will, look one day at your mood meter for the last one week or 1 month, look at the history, and you would realize, I have this aunt that I really hate. She was visiting me for these 4 days, but my mood meter says I was the happiest when she was there. Do I really hate her? Or alternately, there is this relationship that I am in. It's a long distance relationship. And my mood meter says these are the 4 days that I was at my worst. Well, this guy or this girl was visiting. Am I really in a healthy relationship with that person? But what we have realized, and this is what we are hearing from a lot of psychologists now, is they say they want to use this mood meter for them to be able to look at what their patients were going through while they go from one session to the other. Usually when somebody comes in, they remember what they went through today and yesterday and maybe the day before. Well, day before will also be fuzzy. But they certainly don't remember that last 1 week or 2 weeks or 1 month, depending on how frequently they come for therapy. Psychologists are saying this mood meter may just be another tool that we can utilize for us to look at that historical significance of how people are looking at or how people are going through and evaluating and seeking mental health support for that. In fact, I'm very glad to hear the inputs from you as well as from Dr. Tanwar. That really tells me we are in the right direction. We are in the middle of a literature festival. So before we end, I want all three of you, if you can share your thoughts as a professional, as well as an individual, of the value and of the role that literature plays in terms of mental health, reading plays in terms of mental health. So Dr. Tanwar, let's start with you.
So at Fortis, as a team, we've been working a lot on creating mental health content. We published a mental health curriculum for schools, and this was in 2018. It wasn't after COVID. So there was a vision that there is schools require that kind of awareness on how to really help children. And there are multiple books we've written. We've written on parenting and all from, we're mental health experts and practitioners, so we've been doing that. I think content has a lot of role to play, and in building awareness, in building even some basic tools, tips that we can give to people in terms of also helping them understand what's awareness, what's well-being, what's mental health, what's mental illness in different age groups for that matter. So whether you talk about loneliness, whether you talk about how can we raise our children well, whether you talk about media literacy, all of these aspects is something that we need to look at in terms of content and literature. And more to come. We're coming with more books. More books are in the upcoming. So yes, literature and content has a lot of role to play over here. And when it comes to well-being, I think another thing that COVID did help us realize is how to go back to some of the basics. So for me, how do I take my day off is I switch off. I listen to some good, nice Indian classical music because I'm fond of music. I do my basic walk. And the other thing that we realized is how we need to stay connected to our family and have some conversations with them without the phones, without any digital aspect, just have some good, fun conversations, because our basic is what keeps us grounded and well in the long run.
Dr. Tarun, I know we are running out of time. So very quickly, what is the role that reading and literature can play in mental health?
I think I would say the major thing is the knowledge. So literature, media, all of these things, I think what it imparts to us is the information and how we absorb that and the knowledge it creates. And it's a big ocean to start with. And as we have been talking about, awareness is one part of it. And to create that level of awareness, you need to educate people around, give that knowledge, and that is where it will break the level of stigma. Just to say the simple stats, even while we are sitting in the room, we know that within our lifetime, 1 in 8 of us at some point will have some kind of mental health problem. So it's so prevalent in the world, you can't ignore this. This exists. It's just about that the more knowledge we have, the more preventive work we can do, the better we can get to. And one of the other part is what we were talking about earlier, what again, all the knowledge through the media and through the information system we get. The challenges India is going through at the moment, we are in scarcity of any mental health professional throughout the India. In total, if you see, we haven't got more than 5,000 psychiatrists in the whole of India to start with. If you talk about clinical psychologists, it's even worse. We only have got, say, 2,000, 2,500 clinical psychologists in the whole of India. And you can imagine for this population, and if you take the simple stats of 1 in 8 at any one point, this is something impossible to impart, to provide that level of support to the demand which India does need to have at this moment in time. So that's where the initiative is, that how we can help and support people from their home, within their setting, they can get some help to start with. So this is the part of the media where we start, and this is how we can support society. Thank you.
So Dr. Reddy, a quick word from you.
One, since you've asked about books and reading, all of us acknowledge that, we would have been encouraged to read early years, schooling, colleges, something. And a lot of times people say that, oh, I've given up reading. I've not been reading much. I've not gotten back to it because I'm too busy, right? One personal experience with respect to reading I would like to say is, if not anything else, it brings back your focus and attention very, very well if you can put your mind to it. This is again my own journey. I'm a voracious reader, I read a lot, but previous 3-4 years I've been reading very, very less because of my busy schedules. Rather than having your mobile phone or something else next to your bed, a habit of having a book, it can also help in the journey of healing too, because it brings your attention and focus back. A lot of times we see people saying that I've lost my focus and attention. Reading can actually help in that journey of healing also. It did me too. I finish at least 2 books a week. That's the best I can do right now. And what kind of things you want to read can make a great impact on the kind of person you would become a year later. Trust me on that. So while you take the steps towards healing and being better, I think one of the ways books and literature can help, one is knowledge, surely, like he said. Second is it can act on your perspective, changing your perspective at a subconscious level. and you tend to act differently few months down the line to the same triggers just because of the literature and the books that you've been reading through, whichever interests you, right? Fiction or non-fiction. But reading can help in the process of healing as well. And reading those stories and getting that knowledge, I think, will make us all feel a little less lonely, thinking that it's not just me battling this, you know. That can build the confidence in that way too. So I think that way both fit. Mental health and reading definitely has a relationship I see both in my life, and I hope you do too. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. While this engrossing conversation asks me to keep going, I can see a lot of people in the audiences are interested. Thank you so much, Dr. Reddy, Dr. Sehgal, Dr. Tanwar, for giving your valuable time, for coming here and talking about this all-important aspect of mental health and wellness. And thank you so much, all of you, for being here and listening to us. With that, we come to an end of this session. Thank you so much.
What an insightful session it was. And biggest of all, it was a learning. Thank you, Dr. Sravani, for making me understand it was not a bad day, it was just a bad moment.